Hello, my name is Jaru. Today I'm talking about Deltarune. There will be major spoilers for both Deltarune and Undertale, so please play them both before watching this. This video is the fourth in a series, so I highly recommend you check out my previous videos in order to get some important context. Today's video will consist of me discussing and analyzing one of the most puzzling characters in Deltarune. I am of course referring to the lonely prince from the dark, Ralsei. I will go over all of the options regarding Ralsei's true nature before I end the video by discussing my personal theory regarding what Ralsei truly is. You'll want to stick around for that part, as my theory is one that you've likely never heard before. Not only will I be giving what I think is a rather shocking answer to the mystery of Ralsei, I will also be giving you two more revelations that are so important that they could easily have been given their own videos. In total, this theory might have even more insane ramifications than even my theory on the Angel, which was pretty insane in its own right. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start by discussing all the options regarding what exactly Ralsei could be. The broad categories are that he is a Lightner, a Darkner, or something unique. However, we can further subdivide the Lightner category into a couple more specific options. Within the Lightner category, Ralsei could be a human, a monster, or he may literally be Asriel. That gives us a total of 5 possible answers to the question of what is Ralsei. However, before we can even begin considering these options, we first need to define exactly what Darkners and Lightners are, as well as what attributes they possess. Let's start with Lightners. Lightners are humans and monsters. They live in the real world, aka the light world, and they have the power of determination. Naturally, this also means they have souls. Souls haven't been brought up too much in Deltarune, but based off the way Spamton talks about it, it would appear that Darkners do not have souls, while Lightners do have souls. This is backed up by the fact that the Queen was under the impression that only Lightners are capable of creating dark fountains, which makes sense since she believes that determination is needed to create such fountains, and determination is generated by souls. The next Lightner attribute is that when in combat in the dark world, Lightners can be brought below 0 HP. This does not kill them, but instead just seems to knock them unconscious, or something similar to that. This is supported by the fact that Susie's sleeping pose is the same as the pose she has when she's below 0 HP. Furthermore, when Chris gets knocked below 0 HP in this fight with Birdley, he says that Chris is down, to which Noelle responds that she can still hear their voice despite this. Similarly, if Chris is downed in this fight, Susie talks about Chris as if they weren't able to hear her or respond to her. This seems to imply that under normal circumstances, being below 0 HP prevents you from talking, which further supports the notion that being below 0 HP is the equivalent of being unconscious for Lightners. Notably, Lightners have monochrome character portraits no matter which world they are in. And lastly, Lightners are different from Darkners in that Lightners can travel in the world of light. Lightners only change slightly upon switching between the light world and the dark world, and thus still retain most of their normal attributes no matter which world they are in. As for the lore regarding the Lightners, Sham says the Lightners created the Darkners and gave them purpose. This is likely referring to the fact that the Lightners are responsible for creating the inanimate objects that would later become the Darkners. Speaking of which, let's talk about those Darkners. Originally, Darkners were simply inanimate objects. Sham was a stuffed animal, Lancer was a playing card, Queen was a computer, and so on. However, if an inanimate object is placed within range of a dark fountain, it is brought to life and granted a brand new form. Take Lancer, for example. He was originally a simple playing card, but through the power of a dark fountain, he was granted life, intelligence, various supernatural powers, and a brand new humanoid form. All Darkners received similar blessings, although the specific powers and body shape that Darkners receive can vary quite widely. For example, Lancer, Queen, and Sham are all roughly human-shaped, but Clover, Mouse, and Task are all distinctly not human-shaped. As I mentioned before, Darkners don't seem to have souls. This makes sense, as Darkners aren't really living creatures. They are inanimate objects that have been granted unique properties as a result of being exposed to a dark fountain. Why do dark fountains bring these objects to life? Well, we don't know for certain, but here is what we do know. Dark fountains are created using determination. In Undertale, we know that injecting something with determination will grant that thing the will to live. As such, it stands to reason that whatever substance the Dark Fountain is pumping out involves determination in some way, as determination is the only source of power that we know of that is capable of bringing something to life. Darkners cannot be brought below 0 HP in most circumstances and will instead run away. However, upon using Snowgrave on a Darkner, they turn red and disintegrate. This is different from the monsters in Undertale, as monsters would turn into gray dust upon dying, as opposed to whatever red substance makes up the Darkners. Notably, Darkners have colored portraits, as opposed to the black and white portraits that Lightners possess. And lastly, upon leaving the range of a dark fountain and entering the light world, a Darkner will revert back into an inanimate object. When this happens, the Darkner loses all of their powers and abilities until such time as they return to a dark fountain. That said, according to Ralsei, each Darkner is a reflection of the will of their fountain, which means that if a Darkner travels from one dark world to another, they may not be compatible with that world and will thus turn into a statue. As for the lore regarding the Darkners, they are said to have been created by the Lightners, and they derive their purpose from said Lightners. Ralsei tells Lancer that the purpose of Darkners is to assist the Lightners, and that doing so is the only way their kind can feel fulfilled. Similarly, he tells Queen that their purpose is to make Lightners happy. So, that is the gist of what Lightners and Darkners are. Lightners are regular people, while Darkners are inanimate objects brought to life through the power of a dark fountain. With the preliminaries out of the way, let's start going through the options regarding what exactly Ralsei could be. Let's begin by considering the option Ralsei claims to be. Is Ralsei a Darkner? There is a fair bit of evidence in favor of this interpretation. He repeatedly implies that he is a Darkner, and while Ralsei is a very suspicious entity, I don't think he's the kind of person who would outright lie. As for physical evidence, we have only ever seen Ralsei in the Dark World, and while that's not concrete evidence that he's a Darkner, it at least leaves the door open. If Ralsei had appeared in the Light World at any point, that would have damaged the theory that he's a Darkner, as Darkners revert back into mundane objects upon entering the Light World. Continuing with the physical evidence, the fact that Ralsei completely disappears upon dropping below 0 HP definitely works as evidence of him being a Darkner, as both Susie and Chris simply fall down upon losing all their HP. The fact that Ralsei behaves in a way that is different from both a human and a monster suggests that he is neither of those, and as a result, supports the idea that he is a Darkner. Then there's the fact that his description literally refers to him as a dark world being. It is somewhat suspicious that it doesn't just refer to him as a Darkner and instead uses this more vague wording, but still, this at least confirms that Ralsei is not a light world being. More evidence of Ralsei being a Darkner is the simple fact that he knows so much about the Dark World. He knows the prophecy, he knows how dark fountains work, he knows how Darkners work, and he knows how separate dark worlds work. To be blunt, Ralsei has proven to be more well-informed about the plot than nearly any other character. Pretty much the only Darkners who may have greater knowledge are Jevel and Spampton, but both of those characters are insane and speak in riddles, so Ralsei still gets bonus points for being the most knowledgeable of the sane and comprehensible Darkners. Some more evidence in favor of Ralsei being a Darkner comes from his appearance. While it's strange that he looks so similar to Asriel, there are some key differences. For one, Ralsei has a colored portrait, which is normally only possessed by Darkners. But most notably, Ralsei has these bright pink horns, glasses, and wears a green robe with a pink scarf. Toriel at one point mentions that Chris used to have a pair of red horns that they loved to wear, and she doesn't know what happened to them. Darkners are created when mundane objects are exposed to the power of a dark fountain, so it seems probable that those red horns were one of the objects used to create Ralsei. Furthermore, it is specifically mentioned that the green crayon is missing from the Dreamer household, and Ralsei predominantly wears green, so it seems feasible that this green crayon was yet another of the objects used to create Ralsei. Maybe someone drew a picture of Asriel wearing this costume, and then that picture was brought to life by a dark fountain. We do see several drawings of various characters throughout the school, after all. All this conjecture seems to further support the notion that Ralsei is a Darkner. However, there are issues with the Ralsei is a Darkner theory. For starters, Ralsei disappearing when he gets knocked out and dropping his clothes on the floor is largely unique to him, and while neither Chris nor Susie do this when they lose their HP, no other Darkner does this either. Even when using Snowgrave on a Darkner, they don't drop their clothes on the floor the way Ralsei does. Furthermore, while Ralsei being informed about the Dark World is interesting, the fact that he seems to know way more than any other Darkner is rather suspicious. Why does Ralsei know all this stuff about the prophecy and about how fountains work, while neither the Spade King nor the Queen have any such knowledge? Those characters are also royalty who rule over dark worlds, just like Ralsei, so why do they know so much less than him? Also, how does Ralsei know Chris and Susie's names? If he was a Darkner who had been trapped in his castle town for ages, then how could he know the names of two specific Lightners? That is suspicious as all get out. Then there's the fact that Ralsei can cross between dark worlds, which is a power that no other Darkner has demonstrated. Technically, Lancer crossed over into Ralsei's castle town at the start of Chapter 1, but this is implied to only be possible because those two dark worlds are physically adjacent to each other in the light world. The grand doors that we see here are pretty strongly implied to be the dark world equivalent to this door that we see in the light world. My point being, the only time we've seen a Darkner travel between dark worlds that are not directly physically connected in the light world was when Ralsei traveled from his castle town all the way to the cyber world, which is inside the library. Why can Ralsei do this, but no other Darkners can? We never see any other Card Kingdom Darkners show up in the cyber world, so why is Ralsei the only one who makes that journey? Lancer and Rule's card were only able to show up because Chris carried them through the light world. So overall, this seems to suggest that Ralsei has some unique powers that other Darkners don't have. This seems to include his ability to not turn into a statue while in other dark worlds. Both Lancer and Rule's card turn into statues while within the cyber world, and Ralsei states that this is because they are from a different dark world, and thus they don't belong in this world. This seems to suggest that Ralsei, who does not turn into a statue, has some special property that protects him from this effect. That might work as evidence that he is not a Darkner. However, Ralsei specifically says that a Darkner may not belong, which seems to imply that certain Darkners could travel to other Dark Worlds provided they were compatible with that Dark World's theme. For example, the cyberworld was all about robots, computers, and the internet, so Lancer, a physical playing card, did not match the world's theme and thus turned to stone. Same with Rule's card. However, the thrash machine that Rules brought with him never turns to stone, despite being directly implied to be alive. The reason for this could be that the thrash machine is compatible with Cyberworld due to it being a machine, and thus it never turns into a statue. As such, you could make the argument that Ralsei is such a submissive character that he can conform to the will of any given Dark World. Case in point, he allows Queen to turn him into one of her butlers. By contrast, Lancer and Rule's card are such boisterous personalities that they could not fit in. Although, I think it's interesting that Rule's card turned into stone much later than Lancer. In fact, Rule's card never fully transforms at all. His head never turns to stone. This could be because, much like how Ralsei allowed Queen to make him a butler, Rule's card just wanted to be the Queen's head minion. As such, since Rules was at least trying to fit in, maybe that's why he never fully turned to stone. By contrast, Lancer clearly has no interest in conforming, so he turned to stone rather quickly once he left Chris's pocket. Of course, I could be wrong about why they turn to stone when they do, but my point is that the way Ralsei phrases this line leaves it very open to interpretation. As such, we can't outright say that Ralsei not turning into stone is proof that he's not a Darkner. However, there is still one rather big piece of evidence to suggest that Ralsei is more than what he claims to be. And that is the fact that he looks and behaves almost identically to Asriel. No other Darkner that we've met thus far has looked so similar to a character from the Light World. In fact, people specifically comment on the fact that Ralsei looks so much like the Dreamer family. Noelle grew up alongside Asriel, and thus has a line where she seems to make note of how similar Ralsei looks to Asriel. Susie also has such a line as she outright states that Ralsei looks a lot like Toriel. Why would he look like that? If someone made a drawing of Asriel and exposed it to a dark fountain, would that create a character like Ralsei? We see multiple drawings throughout the school, so it's feasible that someone like Chris made a drawing of Asriel wearing a Halloween costume, and then it got exposed to the Dark Fountain. But even if that was used to explain Ralsei's physical appearance, what it doesn't really explain is Ralsei's personality. Ralsei has a nearly identical attitude and worldview to that of Asriel. They both advocate against violence, they're both sweet and kind, they both befriend the player, and they both seem to know what saving and loading are. My point being that Ralsei being some sort of alternate version of Asriel definitely makes it feel like Ralsei either is not a Darkner or that he is some sort of very special Darkner. Speaking of which, let's talk about the opposite end of the spectrum. Is Ralsei a Lightner? Well, right out the gate, we can safely say that Ralsei is not a human. So the real question is whether or not Ralsei is a monster. Well, obviously, Ralsei looking and acting so much like Asriel, who we know is a monster, definitely supports the idea that Ralsei may be one as well. In fact, a common theory is that not only is Ralsei a Lightner, but that he is literally Asriel. Of course, there are issues with this theory. Most notably, there are significant physical differences between the two, what with Ralsei having pink horns and glasses, which is something Asriel does not possess. There's also the fact that Queen rather blatantly does not have a room for Ralsei, despite clearly having a room for Asriel. Also, Noelle grew up alongside Asriel, and she barely takes notice of Ralsei, which implies that Ralsei looks so different from Asriel that the idea of him being Asriel never even crosses Noelle's mind. So, while there is some room to argue that Ralsei is a Lightner, I think there is much less room to argue that Ralsei is literally Asriel. He's clearly connected to Asriel in some way, but I don't think they're the same person given what we know. Regardless, Ralsei looking like a Lightner definitely works as evidence that he may also be a Lightner, even if he's not literally Asriel. Ralsei can wield magic, just like Susie and Noelle, and he even directly teaches Susie how to use healing magic, which pretty much confirms that Ralsei uses the same type of magic as the monsters. There's also the fact that, thus far, we've only ever had Lightners in our party. We've never had any other Darkners if you don't include Ralsei, so that could be interpreted as evidence that he just isn't a Darkner. Then there's the fact that he clearly knows what the layout of the school is. He might just know this because he's seen the layout of the school in the Dark World, but it could also be evidence that Ralsei has been to the Light World, which is something that a Darkner cannot do. Then there's the fact that Ralsei traveled all the way to the cyber world at the start of Chapter 2. As far as we know, there are no pathways in the Dark World connecting the castle town to the cyber world, which may suggest that Ralsei traveled to the Light World in order to reach the library. That would explain why, when we see him for the first time in the cyber world, he appears coming from the west, as if he entered the cyber world through the same entrance that Susie and Chris used. Remember that the castle town is to the northeast of the library, so if Ralsei had traveled to the cyber world by using some sort of path through the dark world, then shouldn't he have approached Chris and Susie coming from the east and not from the west? It's possible that Dark World travel is more complicated than what we've seen thus far, but based off the way the Card Kingdom is physically located to the east of Castletown, and thus reflects the Light World layout, it seems probable that the Cyber World would be physically located to the southwest of the Castletown. So, if Ralsei approached from that direction through the Dark World, why did he show up coming from the west? Furthermore, Ralsei shows up extremely quickly in the cyber world. We know for a fact that traveling through a dark world takes a significantly longer period of time than traveling through the light world. Case in point, the Card Kingdom was so big that it took the entirety of Chapter 1 to travel from one end to the other. By contrast, once you're in the light world, it only takes a few seconds to walk across the classroom that the Card Kingdom represented. And the cyber world is much farther away from the castle town than the Card Kingdom was. As such, if Ralsei really did travel through the dark world to get to the cyber world, then how did he get there so quickly? Does he secretly have a teleporter that he hasn't shown us? If not, then the most logical explanation is that Ralsei arrived so quickly because he traveled through the light world, which would imply that he might be a Lightner. In fact, now that I think about it, how did Ralsei get back to his castle town at the end of Chapter 1? We left Ralsei right here, walked a few feet, sealed the fountain, and then returned to the light world. Once the fountain was sealed, Lancer and all the other Card Kingdom Darkners were stuck as mundane objects in this classroom, and Chris had to fetch them at the start of Chapter 2. And yet, Chris does not have to fetch Ralsei. Ralsei just shows up back in Castletown. In fact, after you seal the fountain in the cyberworld, Ralsei once again just teleports to his castle town. We don't carry him in our inventory, and we don't see him in the light world. So how on earth did Ralsei get back? I'm beginning to think Ralsei really can teleport. Well, regardless of exactly how Ralsei is getting about, it's clearly something that no other Darkner can do, which works as evidence of him potentially being a Lightner. And lastly, Ralsei knowing so much about the light world could definitely be interpreted as evidence that he's more than a Darkner. He knows the school's layout, he knows about the concept of homework, he knows enough about technology to make a sleep mode joke, he calls Spampton a corrupted program, he knows something about the Angel, he knows what guns are, and of course he knows Susie and Chris's names without them ever telling him. That's a lot of knowledge for a Darkner who has never left his castle town before. Ralsei, being a Lightner, would provide an explanation for a lot of this knowledge. However, that's where the evidence starts to turn against the Ralsei is a Lightner theory. For one, Ralsei is literally referred to as a dark world being in his description, and we have only ever seen him in the dark world. Furthermore, the fact that his knocked out animation is so different from the other Lightners makes it very clear that Ralsei is something different from them. In addition, Darkners are constantly recognizing Susie and Chris as Lightners on sight, yet nobody ever addresses Ralsei as a Lightner. The Queen pretty much ignores Ralsei and clearly does not consider him a candidate for becoming the new knight. And the Spade King rather blatantly refers to Ralsei as the Lightner's patsy, which would be a rather strange thing to say if Ralsei was also a Lightner. Furthermore, if Ralsei really was a Lightner just like Chris and Susie, then he should have showed up in the empty classroom at the end of Chapter 1 and in the computer lab at the end of Chapter 2. The fact that he doesn't either shows that he is not a Lightner, or it shows that he has powers like teleportation that no other Lightner possesses. Throw in the fact that Ralsei knows way more about the dark world than the Lightners do, and the fact that Ralsei makes it extremely clear that he's been living in the castle town for a long time, and the fact that everything is a first for him, and all that just sort of combines to show that he probably isn't a Lightner. It just doesn't seem to add up given what we know. And if he really was a Lightner from the real world, then we would have to explain why there's this random monster in the world that just so happens to look nearly identical to Asriel and happens to have a name that is an anagram of Asriel. Ralsei may be more than just a Darkner, but it just doesn't make sense logistically for him to be a Lightner. Not without some crazy plot twists like Asriel having a twin brother or something like that. So, let's summarize. The options for what Ralsei could be are as follows: a human, a monster, Asriel, a Darkner, or something unique. Ralsei being a human is so absurd that it can be ignored. Ralsei being Asriel has so many problems that it can also probably be ignored. That leaves us with Ralsei either being a monster, a Darkner, or something entirely unique. The main focus of the discourse in the community has been over whether Ralsei is a monster or a Darkner, and as we've just seen, neither option really works perfectly. There are a lot of things Ralsei can do that neither a monster nor a Darkner can. He implies he's a Darkner, and he's described as a dark world being, but that doesn't explain all his peculiarities. As such, I think it's safe to say that the correct answer to what is Ralsei is that he's something unique. That conclusion, that Ralsei is a special entity, is not a new one. Many people have theorized that since he's the guardian of the Grand Fountain, perhaps that grants him some sort of unique powers. After all, if Ralsei's fountain can bring any Darkner to life, then wouldn't it make sense for Ralsei, the guardian of this fountain, to be capable of living in any dark world? It has some narrative logic to it. His fountain can help a Darkner no matter what dark world they're from, and Ralsei can go to any dark world to recruit those Darkners. Ralsei is the one who introduces the recruiting mechanic, so it stands to reason that he may have been created with the specific purpose of recruiting other Darkners to his castle town. And if that was the case, Ralsei being granted the ability to survive in any dark world would make sense. However, the idea that Ralsei gets all his unique attributes as a result of being the guardian of the Grand Fountain has issues. Namely, it doesn't answer all the questions. It doesn't explain Ralsei's connection to Asriel. It doesn't explain why Ralsei behaves so differently from other Darkners. Ralsei said that Darkners reflect the will of their fountain, but what will could the Grand Fountain have that would justify creating an entity like Ralsei? Furthermore, who created the Grand Fountain? Has it always existed? If not, then who created it? Was it made by the Knight? If so, why would the Knight want Ralsei to exist? And if the Knight didn't create Ralsei, then who did? And why? Needless to say, there's a ton of unanswered questions here, and none of them have any clear explanations. Which brings us to the final theory I will be discussing in this video. This is the theory that I personally came up with. This theory that I have makes a lot of sense given what we know about Undertale and Deltarune, and I feel like it works on many levels. I think my theory potentially explains what Ralsei is, why he looks and acts like Asriel, why Ralsei seems to possess the powers of both a Darkner and a Lightner, and also why he seems to be so interested in Chris specifically. First off, let's have a closer look at what a Darkner actually is. A Darkner is a sentient life form that is created when an object is exposed to the power of a dark fountain. Dark fountains are created through determination. The fact that dark fountains bring mundane objects to life makes perfect sense given what we know about determination. In Undertale, it specifically states that imbuing something with determination will literally grant it the will to live. So, the power of a dark fountain basically just showers everything nearby with the power of determination, and as a result, everything in its radius is temporarily brought to life so long as they continue to be showered with the dark fountain's power. In short, Darkners are mundane, inanimate objects that are brought to life through the power of determination. But wait, doesn't that all sound eerily familiar? Where have we heard of this before? A mundane object that was granted intelligence by being exposed to determination? A mundane object that gained incredible powers after being brought to life? A mundane object that was granted the personality and memories of Asriel Dreamer? Have you figured it out yet? We're talking about Flowey. The similarities between Flowey and Ralsei are numerous. They both teach you about the nature of your soul. They are neither human nor monster. They are the first members of their species that you speak to. They are both introduced only to get interrupted by an interloper using fire. They are both alternate versions of Asriel Dreamer. They are both clearly hiding something from the player. They are both princes of their respective kingdoms. They both know about the saving and loading feature, and they both ultimately befriend the human protagonist while embracing a pacifist philosophy. The similarities between Flowey and Ralsei are overwhelming. This leads us to a very important question. Why? Why are they so similar? Well, to understand the answer, you must first ask the correct question. The correct question, the question that needs to be asked in order to understand any of this, the question that I believe could solve everything about Ralsei's confounding existence, the horrible question that will lead us down a path of tragedy and misery, is this. If a Darkner is created when an object is exposed to a dark fountain, then what would happen if that object was imbued with the essence of a monster? In other words, what would happen if an object coated in the dust of a dead monster was granted the will to live? There used to only be one answer to that question, but now I believe there's two. Ralsei isn't just a Darkner. Ralsei isn't just a Lightner. He is both. He is the essence of a Lightner given the power of a Darkner. He is the product of a mundane object combined with the essence of a dead monster being brought to life through the power of determination. Ralsei is literally the Deltarune version of Flowey. That's why they have so much in common. They were both mundane objects, coated in monster dust, imbued with the power of determination, and granted the personality of Asriel. That is why Ralsei is labeled as a dark world being, and not just a Darkner. It's true that Ralsei is from the dark world, but to call him a Darkner wouldn't be accurate. He is more than any Darkner, just like how Flowey is more than any flower. Of course, you may be wondering, why does Ralsei have emotions when Flowey didn't? Why do any Darkners have emotions if the process that created them is so similar to the process that created Flowey? Don't you need a soul to feel emotions? Well, to put it simply, no, you don't need a soul to feel emotions. Despite popular belief, Flowey did have emotions. He struggled to feel love and compassion, but he demonstrated a variety of other emotions during his time. He laughed at things he found funny. He enjoyed the company of Papyrus and found him amusing. He felt fear at the notion of dying, and he felt enough compassion to help out his mother when she was blackout drunk, as we see in the alarm clock app. Flowey always had emotions. He just struggled to feel love. Why did he struggle to feel love? It's because of how he was created. Flowey was created when a nightmarish machine forcibly extracted the determination of murdered human children and injected it into a flower. He was created under hellish circumstances, so obviously he would struggle to feel empathy. It is well known that traumatic experiences occurring at a young age can cause sociopathic tendencies. And guess what? Not only did Flowey have the memories of Asriel, a murdered and traumatized child, he also had the determination extracted from several other murdered and traumatized children. And that's not even discussing the trauma that likely resulted from having the memories of Asriel while being stuck in the body of a flower. Flowey is a cocktail of pain, trauma, and misery harnessed from the corpses of dead children. No freaking wonder he struggled to feel love and empathy. Anybody would become a sociopath after experiencing something like that. By contrast, the process that creates Darkners imbues them not only with life, but with a full personality, complete with love, hopes, and dreams. While dark fountains are strange and mysterious, it seems certain that they are not created using the essence of murdered children. And as a result, Darkners are not sociopaths. That's why Ralsei is a sweetheart while Flowey was a nightmare. The process that created them was drastically different. Now, I could end the video right there, but you know full well there's still more to discuss. There's an issue with this theory of mine, an issue that you've likely already noticed. Ralsei isn't just any dead monster. He was created using a very specific monster's dust. Just like Flowey, he was created using the remains of Asriel Dreamer. The issue I can hear you saying is that Asriel is not dead. He's away at college. Everyone says so. This, my dear viewer, is where I blow your mind for a second time. Have you ever wondered how people keep up to date regarding Asriel? How they know that he's away at college? How they know he's coming home soon? It's simple. They ask Chris. Chris is specifically well known for talking to Asriel on a regular basis. But wait, how does Chris talk to Asriel? Do they use their phone? Well, no. Asriel is not a contact Chris has in their phone menu. Furthermore, if it was possible to use a phone to contact Asriel, then Burger Pants, someone who clearly has a phone, would not need to ask Chris to tell Asriel about his new girlfriend. No, instead, Chris communicates with Asriel by using their computer. That's why Alphys says that the internet being down is preventing Chris from talking to their brother. Chris keeps in touch with Asriel by using the internet. Of course, this raises the question, why doesn't Asriel have a phone? We know Toriel happily gives her kids phones so that way she can check up on them. She even did this in Undertale, so it seems certain that she would have given her firstborn child a phone as well. So, why can't anybody use their phone to contact Asriel? The answer, or at least the answer that Chris has told everyone else, is that Asriel's phone is broken. As a result, nobody can call Asriel to check up on him, and thus everybody has to rely on Chris for status updates. Chris is the only member of the Dreamer household that we know is the owner of a computer. Toriel uses one at work, but we have no evidence that she knows how to use email. Older people often have a hard time using modern technology, especially if that older person is a boss monster who has lived for thousands of years. As such, the only person that is capable of contacting Asriel via the internet is Chris. Or at least, that's what Chris wants everyone to think. The truth is that Chris was never in contact with their brother. Chris has not been staying up late talking to Asriel every night. That was a lie they told to cover up the truth. The truth is that Asriel never left to go to college. The truth is that Asriel will never go anywhere ever again. The truth is that Asriel, just like in Undertale, is dead. Here is how the story played out. Several months ago, right before Asriel was about to head off to college, Chris, late at night, went up to the school. Why did they go up there? Well, Chris had seen this really cool video where a man created a super sharp knife out of Jello, and that gave Chris a great idea for a prank. They would dress up like a monster using their favorite plastic devil horns and a green robe and would hide in the closet at the school. Chris would then jump out and startle someone with their knife, much like how they jump-scared Noelle in the past. Asriel noticed his younger sibling sneaking off, and since he was a responsible older brother who did his best to make up for Chris's bad behavior, he followed Chris to make sure they didn't cause any trouble. And so, sneaking into the building, Asriel discovers Chris inside of the closet at the north end of the school. Asriel barges in, intending to interrupt whatever prank Chris was performing, only for something terrible to happen. Chris, startled by the sudden appearance of their brother, trips and falls, and in doing so, accidentally stabs their beloved older sibling. Asriel, grievously wounded by Chris's knife, dies in Chris's arms, with his dust scattering across the costume Chris was wearing. Chris, horrified at what they had done, abandons their dust-covered costume in that closet and runs back home, desperately trying to think of a way to undo their mistake. The next morning, Chris, trying to buy for time, lies and says that Asriel left for college and that Asriel's phone was broken. As a result, if the family wants status updates about Asriel, they'll have to get them from Chris. Chris is panicking and is desperately searching for a solution to their dilemma. They needed to resurrect their brother from the dead. How could that even be possible? Under normal circumstances, it wasn't. But that's when the thought hit them. If normal methods could not bring Asriel back, then maybe magic could. maybe magic could bring their brother back to life. And so, in the following weeks, Chris stays up late every night searching the internet for information on magic. People notice that Chris is staying up super late, as Chris frequently falls asleep during class at school. But they cover this up by claiming they're staying up late talking to Asriel. Chris even consults Caddy, as she claimed to have learned spells from studying the occult. However, none of this works. Despite their best efforts, it seems like Chris's brother is well and truly gone. So imagine Chris's shock when one day, upon going to that dreadful closet, Chris stumbles into a whole other world. And in that world, they discover a person that looks shockingly similar to their dead brother. How could this be? Chris is completely unnerved by this entity, and so, even though Ralsei is extremely friendly, Chris remains deeply suspicious of them. And as a result, Chris receives less healing from Ralsei tea than they do from their other friends. But more importantly, the more Chris learns about this dark world where magic runs rampant and inanimate objects are brought to life, they start to get hopeful. They smile for the first time in a long time and celebrate this discovery by eating an entire pie. For they have begun to realize that maybe, just maybe, there might be a way to revive Asriel after all. As a result, Chris is more than happy to go back to the castle town, and later to the cyberworld, for this magical dark world holds their best shot at saving their brother. And once they learn that it's possible to create more dark fountains, Chris knows precisely what to do. They create their own dark fountain right inside their house. Something that you guys brought up in the comments, and which was a major point in a video by Andrew Cunningham, is that it doesn't make sense for Chris to make this dark fountain if you partake in the Snowgrave route. After all, if Chris saw such horrible things happen to Noelle and Birdley, wouldn't they avoid creating a dark fountain? Wouldn't they want to avoid risking the lives of more people? It seems irrational for Chris to do this. However, once you take into account the death of Asriel, this scene starts to make a lot more sense. Chris, as horrified as they may have been by what happened to Noelle and Birdley, would still insist on creating a dark fountain, as this is the only chance they have to revive Asriel from the dead. Furthermore, Chris is running out of time, because someone, probably Toriel, asked Chris when Asriel was coming home for summer vacation. Chris had no idea, so they looked it up on the internet and told their family when Asriel should be coming back. But because Chris told them this, their family and the rest of the town is expecting Asriel to come home in a couple days. So Chris only has until then to bring their brother back to life. As such, even if they were terrified by the Snowgrave route, they really don't have any other option except to create more dark fountains if they want to undo their mistake and save their brother. To be clear, I know that I am filling in a lot of gaps in order to justify my theory, and that my evidence is limited, but you cannot deny that my theory answers so many questions. My theory tells us why Ralsei looks and acts like Asriel, why Chris has been studying magic, why Chris sleeps through class, why Chris stays up late on the internet, why Chris looked up when the college summer vacation is, why Chris looked up kitchen knife jello, why Asriel is completely absent from the story, why Burger Pants needs to ask Chris to communicate with Asriel on his behalf, why Ralsei has so many similarities to Flowey, why Asriel isn't in our phone contacts, why Ralsei has Chris's plastic devil horns, why Toby Fox bothered telling us about Chris playing pranks with bath bombs and jump scares, why Ralsei has such mysterious powers, and why Chris would create a dark fountain after the events of the Snowgrave route. My theory could totally be wrong, but please tell me about a single other theory that can answer so many questions and connect so many pieces of evidence all in one go. But wait, there's more. At the start of this video, I promised to give you 3 insane revelations, and I've only given you 2 thus far. I've revealed the true nature of Ralsei and how he came to be, and then I revealed the tragic fate of Asriel, which is likely going to be the core source of drama in this game. But there's still one more insane revelation for me to blow your minds with. And this revelation might just be the most shocking of them all, as I am going to give you an answer to the greatest mystery in Deltarune. The mystery that has been confounding us ever since Chapter 1 was released. I am going to give an answer to a question that you have all been asking. And that question is this: who is possessing Chris? If I had asked this question at any other time, almost everyone in the community would have given the exact same answer. The player. The player is possessing Chris. Obviously. After all, we are the player, and we are controlling Chris. So surely the player is the one possessing Chris, right? No. This answer, that the player is the one possessing Chris, has never sat well with me. Why? Because the player easily controlled Frisk in Undertale. Frisk, the most powerful wielder of determination in this franchise, was completely helpless against the player's control. Not once did Frisk have the opportunity to defy our command. So, tell me, dear viewers, how is Chris able to rebel against us? How is Chris able to do something that even the most powerful human in the franchise was incapable of doing? The answer? Chris has never rebelled against the player. Rebelling against the player is impossible. The reason Chris is able to rebel is because we have never been controlling them in the first place. Chris is not the protagonist of this story. Chris is not the character we are playing as. Toby Fox has tricked us. This entire time, we have actually been playing not as Chris, but as the character hiding in Chris's soul. And who is controlling Chris from inside their own soul? You already know the answer, my dear viewers. Even if you had never watched this video, you would still know the answer because Undertale spoiled the answer a decade ago. A human cannot absorb a human soul. A human cannot absorb a regular monster soul either, because regular monster souls disappear instantly upon the monster's death. The only kind of soul that a human can absorb is a boss monster soul, because boss monster souls can endure just long enough to be absorbed. And guess what? There are only 3 confirmed boss monsters in this franchise. It can't be Toriel, she's still alive. It can't be Asgore, he's still alive. There's only one possible boss monster that Chris could have absorbed. One boss monster who has yet to make an appearance in Deltarune. Chris is being controlled and possessed by the soul of the brother that they killed. The brother who they held in their arms as he died. The brother whose dust went on to create Ralsei. The main character of Deltarune, the one who Chris is rebelling against in these scenes, and the one who we, the player, are actually controlling, is none other than Asriel. We should have seen this coming. The answer is so obvious now that I see it. Toby Fox, that sly dog, is telling the exact same story again. In both games, Toriel and Asgore had a human child and a monster child. In both games, one of their children tragically died only to be absorbed by their sibling. The one difference is that in Undertale, the human died and was absorbed by Asriel, whereas in Deltarune, Asriel died and was absorbed by the human. And best of all, do you remember what happened after Asriel absorbed their sibling's soul in Undertale? Asriel's will proved to be stronger than his siblings, and so Asriel ended up taking full control of their shared body. And guess what? In Deltarune, the exact same thing has happened again. After fusing together, Asriel's will proved to be stronger than their siblings, and thus Asriel has taken full control of their shared body. Asriel is the one controlling Chris. It never made sense that Chris was rebelling against the player, because there is zero evidence that rebelling against the player is even possible. But do you know what there is evidence for? Rebelling against the person who has absorbed your soul. Asriel did it to Kara, the human souls did it to Flowey, and now Chris is doing it to Asriel. My theory not only explains what Ralsei is, it not only explains what's going on with Asriel, but it also explains who is possessing Chris. It makes too much sense. Heck, even the fact that Chris is able to remove their soul at all could be explained by this theory. We know that a monster who absorbs a human soul gains unfathomable power, but we never got to find out what kind of powers a human would gain if they absorbed a boss monster's soul. But now we do. It seems almost certain that the reason Chris is able to remove their soul without dying is because they are no longer just a human. They are more than a human. They have the combined power of a boss monster and a human, which grants them the ability to survive just for a little while without their soul. Also, no wonder Chris is weirded out by Ralsei. They know Ralsei is not Asriel because Asriel is literally controlling them from inside their own soul. Oh my god, think of the ramifications of this. If this theory is true, then that means there are two versions of Asriel at play in this story. There's the soul of Asriel, who is currently controlling the body of their sibling, and then there's the body of Asriel, which has been reanimated through the power of the Grand Fountain. Wait, oh my god. Ralsei is a nobody from Kingdom Hearts. Ralsei is literally a soulless body that has been brought back to life. Oh my god. That's why Ralsei has the black heart-shaped hole in the front of his chest. It's because he used to have a soul before he was killed by Chris. Oh my god. Ralsei is literally a Kingdom Hearts character. Wait, it gets even better. Andrew Cunningham was wondering why Chris would create a dark fountain after experiencing the Snowgrave route. But this theory perfectly explains that. From Chris's point of view, the Snowgrave route is Asriel going off the deep end and committing atrocities using Chris's body. That would terrify Chris and would make them scared not of dark worlds, but of their own brother. Snowgrave wouldn't have pushed Chris away from creating dark worlds. Snowgrave would have made Chris even more invested in creating dark worlds than in the normal route, because now Chris's loved ones are in danger. After the Snowgrave route, Chris would know that Asriel is willing to use their body to commit atrocities. So Chris would insist on creating dark worlds in order to find a way to get Asriel out of their soul before they kill more people. Oh my god, this is literally Kingdom Hearts! Okay, calm down everyone. There's still an issue with this theory. I can hear you all saying now, but Jaru, if your theory is right, then that means Asriel would be responsible for the Snowgrave route, and that doesn't make sense, because Asriel is a good boy. Asriel would never commit atrocities, right? Also, Noelle said that the person commanding her had a terrifying voice, and Asriel doesn't have a terrifying voice, right? Oh, wait. Yeah, sorry, but we all know full well that Asriel is capable of things much worse than the Snowgrave route. With enough trauma, Asriel can commit genocide, and I'd say being murdered and absorbed by their own sibling is pretty traumatic. Now, to be fair, the trauma that Deltarune Asriel has gone through is much less than the amount of trauma that Flowey went through. However, you have to understand that this is on a sliding scale. On the one end of this scale is the regular, uncorrupted Asriel. This version of the character has experienced no trauma and is thus pure and kind and would never hurt a fly. On the opposite end of this spectrum is Flowey, who has experienced all of the trauma and is thus capable of atrocities on a global scale. The Deltarune Asriel exists somewhere between these two extremes, as he is traumatized, but not to the extent of Flowey, which means that his corruption is not guaranteed. That's why Snowgrave is an optional route as opposed to a guaranteed route. Asriel's humanity, so to speak, has not yet been lost, so there's still hope for him to recover from this trauma. Or maybe he'll be consumed by his trauma and go full sociopath. Both options are still on the table. Now, I can hear some of you saying, but Jaru, even if getting murdered by Chris was traumatic, that's not enough to justify Asriel doing the Snowgrave route. He's still too good of a boy to do something like that. And to be honest, you might be right. However, there is one factor, my dear viewer, that you are not taking into consideration. The player. The player is not controlling Chris, but we are controlling Asriel, which means his fate is in our hands. Frisk was, in all likelihood, a really good kid who didn't want to hurt anyone, but that didn't matter. Frisk was under our control, and thus was capable of committing horrible evil. The same is true for Asriel. Whether he is aware of it or not, he is under our control, and is thus quite capable of falling to the dark side if we force that upon him. I really do have to apologize for making this video. I know that this theory and this idea will upset a lot of you, because it's so horrible and tragic. But the reality is that Alphys's anime was a metaphor for Undertale and Deltarune. The first anime was cheerful and optimistic, just like Undertale, because that was the timeline where it was possible to give everyone a happy ending. But Deltarune is not that timeline. Deltarune is the darker sequel that isn't afraid to treat you like an adult. I hate to break it to you folks, but this is Toby Fox we're talking about. Did you really think he was going to let Asriel have a happy ending? Did you really think he'd let you have a happy, magical Undertale AU where everybody's safe and secure? Of course not. This is the timeline where Mettaton's dreams never became a reality. This is the timeline where Gerson never got to be a legendary hero. This is the timeline where Noelle's dad is dying, and there's nothing she can do. This is the timeline where Asgore is a disgraced former police chief struggling to pay rent. This is the timeline where Undyne and Alphys don't even know each other. This is the timeline where the Amalgamates never got closure with their families. This is the timeline where Grillby's went out of business. This is the timeline where you don't get to see Papyrus, because Papyrus would give you too much hope. There's a reason Sans says that we'd get to see Papyrus when we get to see our brother. We aren't ever seeing our brother, and we aren't ever seeing Papyrus. This is the timeline where your choices don't matter. This is the timeline where things are darker yet darker. This is the timeline where Asriel is secretly dead. I don't know the specifics of how this story is going to play out, but I can tell you one thing. Toby Fox will be breaking your heart into 1,000 tiny pieces before this story is over. And he'll do it using a remixed version of his same old tricks. Of course, that's just my interpretation. And for everyone's sake, including Asriel's, I sincerely hope that I'm wrong. This is a truly horrific story if my theory turns out to be true. And if my theory about the angel is also true, then that would make Deltarune far too dark for a lot of people. I think I'll enjoy it no matter how dark it gets, but I can understand why some of you will find my theory displeasing, to put it lightly. Again, I hope I'm wrong, but this is how the puzzle pieces lined up in my head, and I just had to get my thoughts out there. I could be wrong, of course. I can always be wrong, but I do sincerely believe this is the truth behind Asriel and Ralsei. In my last video, I said the truth of Ralsei was at the heart of this story. I bet you never thought that I meant that so literally. Oh man. Toby Fox. What a mad lad. I hope you guys enjoyed this terribly dark theory video. And if you disagree with it, feel free to share your own theories in the comments below. I'm certain there's details that I missed, and I'm certain you can come up with theories that aren't nearly as distressing as this video's theory. Although, since I can already tell this video will upset people, please allow me to request that you keep things civilized in the comments. You guys have been wonderfully polite thus far, so I'd appreciate it if we could keep that up. And with that, I think I'm just about out of things to say. I'm not sure what my next video is going to be about, which is a first. I've almost run out of topics to discuss regarding Deltarune. But I still want to make more videos, so maybe you guys can help me out with that. What would you like my next video to be about? There's certainly a lot of options. I could discuss who the Roaring Knight is and what role he plays in this story. I could discuss what I think is going on with Sans and how I think he fits into this. And of course, I could always do a video on Gaster. I've actually already written a script for my Gaster theory, although I'll need to drastically rewrite it to account for all these new revelations. But still, if y'all wanted to see that, I could definitely throw something together. Or maybe y'all want to see something completely different. Whatever the case, please let me know in the comments down below. And with that, I think we're done for today. Like if you enjoyed the video, comment if you've got something to say, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, have a fantastic day.